Good morning. For those of you who might not know, my name is Pavani, and this is my husband. Oh, sorry, I'm blocking you. This is my husband, Vajra. We're happy to be with you this morning. We're both going to share. In honor of Gangamata returning soon, I just had to start with a joke. So, a grandmother was taking her 7-year-old grandson to his first confession. And en route, he was a little bit nervous, and he asked her, what should I expect? And she said, well, confession is about telling all the bad things that you've done to the priest. Oh, he was so relieved. He said, good, I haven't done anything bad to the priest. We're all familiar with the story of the prodigal son. And it's an important story because it's our story. And it shows us how God relates to us after we return from our wandering and through many lifetimes and perhaps a few times squandering our energies, our divine energies that have been given to us. And it's notable that in the story, there's very little detail about what the son did on his sojourn. So often when somebody does something wrong or we think about our own past, we think about all the details of what was done wrong and how bad it was and, sort of in gory detail. But in this story, the emphasis is on the son returning home, the son realizing his mistake, returning home with an open heart, with humility, and of how happy the father is to see him again. And so, thinking about this story, it made me wonder, they talk about the big celebratory meal with the fattened calf and all that. What happened after the meal? What happened in the days and weeks and months after that? How did the prodigal son feel being home? Was it difficult for him to reclaim his place as a son, given what he had done? And so that inspired the question, how do we truly let go of our past mistakes? And so I went online to the Ananda Library to see if I could find the answer. And the first thing I came across that I read had a quote from Swami Kriyananda about how he felt in his later years. And I want to read it to you because paraphrasing it, I can't paraphrase it as beautifully as he said it. I can only say that I feel free in my heart. When I leave this world, it will be without a single regret. I have done my best. Yes, I have made mistakes, and I do regret the times, fortunately I think they were few, when I've hurt others. But I am grateful for everything. Many years ago, I offered my life to God, and now I want nothing for myself except to merge in Him. And when I read that, the word that jumped out at me was the word grateful. And gratitude is something that's talked about and researched a lot these days in relation to health and prosperity and relationships and happiness. But the fact that he said, I'm grateful for everything, right after he was talking about the mistakes he had made and perhaps hurting people, regretting that, and then saying, I am grateful for everything. And I wondered, is that a key in our ability to let go of things? And so the thing I love about this path and what attracted me to it is the common sense practicality of it, that we can take these tools and actually try them and see what our experience is. So I tried it. And what I did was I visualized a scene from my past that elicited a sense of regret. And standing in that scene, I focused on feeling grateful. I wasn't feeling grateful for what I had done or what had happened. I was just feeling grateful. And what I experienced then was the most powerful force in the world, and that is love. And that love wasn't coming from me. It was permeating the entire situation. And it didn't change what happened, but it brought this sense of peace. And it reminded me of the analogy that Yogananda talked about of when a room has been in darkness for many years, as soon as you turn on the light, it's as if the darkness had never existed. Our ability to feel gratitude is a little easier after the fact, when we've been able to reflect on how it actually turned out for the best. But it's even more challenging to feel gratitude in the midst of a difficult situation. And I came across a story of Swamiji in the early days of Ananda, and when everyone was at the meditation retreat, and the temple burned down. And he writes that he was maintaining a cheerful attitude, and but inside he really wasn't feeling gratitude for the temple having burned down. And so he sat in meditation and he talked to God. And he said, it took us many months to build that temple. And it's going to take us many more months to rebuild it. However, everything that I do is for you. It doesn't matter how it turns out. I offer everything to you. And he said, then this wave of bliss just came pouring over him. And he said to God again, if you knew how much bliss this was going to give me, why didn't you take the common dome too? So the keys seem to be love for God and gratitude. Both can free us from any darkness, any past mistake, and give us eternal freedom. I'd like to close with a reading from Whispers from Eternity. Put this on. Entitled, I Want to Pour the Scent of Gratefulness at Thy Feet. The doomsday clouds of inevitably tragic events thundered and poured down sheets of suffering on my life. My courage almost drowned in fear as a million difficulties rose up to destroy me. Only by clinging fast to Thee did I survive. Now, when the cannons of uncertainty boom before me and the shells of calumny, persecution, and fierce opposition fall rain-like around me, I am ever protected in the impregnable fortress of Thy love. I am so grateful to Thee. When the light of good fortune dawns again, as it must always, following every hard night of struggles, It is easy to smile welcomely at the pleasing sunrise of thy grace. During dark nights of misfortune, however, I find it even sweeter now to offer thee the flowers of my appreciation for being always there, protecting me. I offer all my gratitude at thy feet of deep inner communion. Receive me, my eternal beloved, in sacred silence. God bless you.
Well, let's face it, on this planet, the odds are stacked against us. Gary Larson, the cartoonist, had a cartoon, one of his classics, is called In God's Kitchen. And there's God in the white robe and the long beard, and there on the counter is a box, the open box of Earthquake. And he's peering into the oven and he's saying, this one looks like it's about half baked. Well, that's pretty much the nature of this place. Swami often referred to it as a mud ball. But here we are, for better or worse. As I was getting ready to start tuning into the service today and the talk, I thought I'd first check my emails yesterday morning, and there in front of me was a matter that I've been dealing with for the longest time. It's family, it's legal stuff, it's difficult, it's challenging, it brings out not the best. It brings out discouragement. I mean, I'm already feeling like the prodigal son here. I'm the one who left Minnesota. Nobody else left Minnesota. Nobody else thought there was anything wrong with being in St. Paul. So my siblings, the kids, everybody stayed there, and here I am wandering off to foreign lands doing strange things. So anyway, I'm feeling deeply discouraged and trying to think, okay, this is a great place to be looking for inspiration. And I realized that I was being the prodigal son. Our birthright is ever new, endless joy. That's what's our due. And there I was, wallowing in the mud of my sorrows, surrounded by the pigs of delusion, gnawing on the empty husks of my own thwarted desires. Okay, that's enough of that. Put it aside. We don't need that. It's not who we truly are. It's just more stuff to deal with. Our lessons are easier to deal with when they're really out there and they're really obvious. When I was a kid, I was once sitting up on the counter and there was the electric range, and I put my hand on the burners. They were all black, and I knew that when they were hot, they turned red. Well, guess what? There was more to it, and I got burned. Well, I did that once. That was enough. Where it gets more difficult is when we bring into it the emotional overtones, the interpretations, the idea of right and wrong with what we're doing. It gets more complex, it gets more involved. The word for sin from the Hebrew and Greek roots is miss the mark. It's an archery term, sin. And it has to do with, specifically, I looked this up in Wikipedia, so you know it's got to be true, right? Specifically, it has to do with missing that gold spot in the middle, but hitting the target somewhere. Now, there's another highly technical term for when the arrow doesn't hit anything at all. It's called a miss. So, what we think of as sin is simply missing the mark. You put out the energy, you're trying to get there, but didn't quite do it. Now, this is a time-honored tradition. I mean, even masters go through it. Yogananda repeatedly took off trying to go to the Himalayas, his flight to the Himalayas. Now, granted, it was a lofty ideal. He was trying to find God, but ultimately, we're all trying to find God in our own clumsy way. He had the aspiration that if he went to God, there would be the realization he could be a Himalayan yogi, and it didn't work and didn't work and didn't work until he finally got it, that finding God was not in the Himalayas, it was at the feet of his guru. And he learned that lesson, and he came back in all humility and bowed at his guru's feet and said, I'm so sorry that I disappointed you. And Yukteswar, of course, said, you can't disappoint me. All I care about is your happiness. The hit or miss process, trying to hit the bullseye, is always going to be trial and error. That's the nature of this planet. I mean, if it weren't that way, we wouldn't be here. We'd be adorning some other planet, as Yukteswar put it. Swami tells the story of a soldier who kept trying and trying, but in a very peculiar way. He would wander around camp picking up pieces of paper. He would look at it, say, this isn't it, throw it away. Pick up another. I mean, he was picking up gum wrappers, cigarette packs, anything he could find, and he'd look at it and say, this isn't it, and he'd throw it away. Well, people started noticing, his fellow soldiers started noticing, and the CO found out, and the CO sent him to the camp psychiatrist. And the camp psychiatrist tried to talk to him about it. How long have you felt this way? What was it like with your parents? And the whole time he's wandering around his office, looking in the wastebasket, looking on the tables, looking on his desk, picking up pieces of paper, looking at it, saying, this isn't it, throwing it aside, picking up something else, this isn't it, throwing it aside. Finally, the camp psychiatrist says, okay, and he starts to write something down. He says, here, take this to your CO. I'm really sorry, son, but we're going to have to send you home. The soldier takes the piece of paper and says, this is it! So we keep trying till we get there. Now, that's not the only option. Swami pointed out in one of his readings that the father of the prodigal son had other sons who weren't prodigal, who didn't get out there. But that can bring its own challenges as well. If you read further in the story, what happened with the son who stayed home and did everything right? He found out about this. He was ticked off. He was angry. He wouldn't go in. He stood outside in a snit. His father came out and said, what, And he said, you never killed a fatted calf for me. Here I am, I do everything, all of this stuff. And his father said, son, please, you're always with me. Everything I have is yours. But my son, whom I thought was dead, has come home. And he couldn't get it. I mean, maybe he did eventually. The story doesn't tell. But there he was. In his own way, he was being prodigal. Because he was denying his birthright, the legacy of joy, the legacy of compassion, the legacy of love that is ours. And he was turning his back on it, wrapped up in his own egoic concerns about me getting mine. It's a little bit like the reminder of the Martha and Mary difficulty. The problem that Martha had wasn't that she was doing all the hard stuff. The problem was the attitude that she had when she was doing it. She wasn't doing it with God. She wasn't inviting God's presence into participating with what she was doing. And that's what Jesus was reprimanding her for. Mary hath chosen the better part. Mary recognizes that whatever you do, whether it's sitting at the feet of the Lord or whether it's in the background taking care of business, because that has to be done too. If you do it with the Lord, you're doing it in the right way. When Swami was a little boy, he did there was a visitor and he did some kindness for him, and he went to his mom later and said, Mommy, wasn't I a good boy? And she said, you weren't good, you did what was right. It's not about being good. It's not about doing the right thing. It's about doing what is right. Interesting thing is to imagine what the prodigal son's response would have been in the same circumstances that the other son responded to with anger. After what he'd been through, what's his reaction likely to be? You know, hey, brother, I've been there. I know what you're talking about. That's how we learn. We go through these things and we learn and we grow and we expand with it. You have to put out the energy. You have to play to win in order to get anywhere with all of this. If you just lay back, well, it'll happen eventually because you'll be pushed into it because that's the nature of it. But you have to put out the energy and you have to open your heart. And when you do that, it doesn't make that much difference whether you get it right or get it wrong, because you'll be guided. You'll be moved there. You don't have to understand it all. Something will happen, and it will take you forward. In fact, it's impossible for us to figure it out, for us to know how it's going to work. We just got to do it. And then gradually we come to understand, because the understanding comes on a deeper level. Because as human beings, as they say, as is said in Isaiah, for my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways. God's ways are his own. And we'll get there. We'll get to the place where we have that understanding. We have that attunement, but it comes from within. It comes from a deeper place. That story, Only a Crotia, master's trying to find the sleepless saint, wandering around, asking for directions from people who are oblivious to the subtle distinctions between left and right. He spent an entire day wandering around. Finally, exhausted, exasperated, the sleepless saint comes and finds him. Said, you had a bit of a hard time, didn't you, today? Smiling. And he says, you remember that rock that you passed by? There was a shrine, and all it was a rock, and Yogananda passed by it, and his thoughts were, oh, these foolish people worshiping a rock. Don't they feel God's presence in all these other places? And the sleepless saint pointed out to him, he's in the rock too, isn't he? You neglected that point, and this was Divine Mother's way of reminding you that God is everywhere. Okay, got the lesson. So we're like that tiny bird. Ultimately, we fight it and we fight it and we fight it, but finally we need to surrender to it. The success is divinely ordained. We can't help but get there in the end. Again, in that same chapter where he talks about the prodigal son, he says, what shepherd, if he has 100 sheep and counts only 99, won't leave the 99 and go in search of that one? This is what God thinks about us. Where's that one out there? So what housewife who has 10 pieces of silver and counts only 9 won't turn the house upside down trying to find that 10th piece? And so it is with us. God is always looking for us in the remotest recesses, in the worst places, in the most difficult situations, waiting, because he won't impose, for that moment when we're ready to turn to him. And then, like the prodigal son's father, the feast is laid out. It's all there for us to enjoy, for us to absorb. As Yogananda wrote, oh, I will come back again and again, crossing 1,000,000 crags of suffering. With bleeding feet I will come, if need be 1,000,000,000,000 times, as long as I know that one stray brother is left behind.